Irwin Loring is a nationally touring comic, current podcast host, and founder of Kaleidoscope Comedy, a well-known entertainment agency based on the East Coast. He's headlined major comedy clubs across the U.S. He's been featured on Comcast On Demand. His comic style has been described as a mix of David Brenner and George Carlin, with just a touch of Don Rickles. He shared the stage with many great touring comics such as Kevin Farley, Jimmie Walker, Gallagher, Jackie the Jokeman, Martling, just to name a few. Thanks for joining us today, everyone.
Hey, Josh, how are you doing today?
Good. This feels almost like deja vu. I don't want to be insincere, but I'm going to say the same thing I said to Shaquita. You're one of the ones we missed the most. You're one of the ones that we saw the most. You're a familiar face. So for me, when the venue had to take a break, some people I see once a year, I see you every month. I see you more than some of my family. So it's good to see you. I miss you.
Well, it's better to be missed than not missed, right? I mean, it's hard, it's hard not being able to get up every month and head down to the Bright Box and see you guys. Because, I think we had a good relationship as far as all of us. We were more like family than we were working partners. So it's hard. It's definitely hard not to see everybody.
Yeah. Well, and I think that goes to say that some people at Bright Box or have seen you at Bright Box might not be familiar, but you're an established comedian with literally thousands of people seeing you at Bright Box alone, but you've been all over. Can you tell us how that started? What got you into comedy? Maybe some of the other venues that really have stuck out for you?
I got into comedy. There's a whole story behind it. I even tell it as a joke on stage. I wanted to be a comic when I was 16 years old. I watched David Brenner on screen and I'm like, I want to do this. And, life gets in the way. And, there I was married with kids. And I went up to my wife and said, hey, you know what? I really want to do stand-up comedy. She looked right at me and said, but you're not funny. It wasn't exactly my favorite moment. And as I say on stage, I fixed that problem. I divorced her. And many of the people at Bright Box know Cortland, who's my current wife. When we were dating, I had told her this desire to do stand-up comedy. And she just looked at me and says, why don't you try? And I randomly put my name in for some open mic, pardon me. And I show up and I'm watching these people on stage and I wasn't even supposed to be there to perform. And the guy asked me when I walked in, hey, do you want to try? Like, yeah, I just want to see how it works. I'm thinking about it, kind of thing. And we're watching these people on stage and they're horrendous. It's just like, and I looked at Cortland at the time, she was my girlfriend. I said, am I crazy for even wanting to get on stage and try and do comedy? These people are doing it right now on the stage. They're terrible and they're probably more established, because I didn't even understand that open mic meant literally somebody could step up from an audience and go on stage. I thought these people were like actual comics just doing their craft. And she just looked at me, she goes, you're funnier sitting in that chair doing nothing than they are on stage. You should do it. And I turned to the guy who was running it and I said, okay, I'll try and do it. And he goes, okay, you're up next. And I looked at Cortland and I said, what am I going to say? Because I had no idea. I hadn't written. I was like so I went on stage. I did maybe 3 minutes, and I think I've been getting on stage ever since. It was realistically, the desire was always there, but the push in the back came from my now wife, Cortland.
It's so funny that you mentioned that it was an open mic and it was kind of unplanned. That's probably not the only place that you cut your teeth, though. Like, was there a stomping grounds for you? Is there a place that you really feel like you honed the craft? Is there a spot that's like near and dear in that thought?
Well, if you go back, we are celebrating our 11 years of doing comedy at a place called Martini's Lounge in White Plains, Maryland. And when I first started doing that, I was still basically an open micer, but I was running. That's when I started kind of running shows and doing it for income. And we were there every single Wednesday for somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 or 5 years. And every Wednesday I had to show up and tell jokes. And of course you had to keep working it and getting it better. And sometimes you were telling those jokes to the same 7 people that you told them to for the last 4 weeks. So it really forced you to get better. So I would say the place that I grew the most was at Martini's. There was also a place in College Park, Maryland. We used to be called EJ's Landing. It's no longer there. It's now a grocery store. It was a hotel. They tore it down and built a grocery store. I guess that says a lot for my career. Comedy was so bad they built a grocery store. But and that was where I was in the very beginning as well. So I was on stage every week, a couple times a week, and really had to host. So I had to really cut in and get better, or it was going to be difficult.
Right. Well, and I think it's true for a lot of performers, whether, when I talk to Sweet about drag or I've talked to a lot of the musicians about music, there's a work ethic involved. There's like a dedication to the craft. And that's what it sounds like. It was work. And I don't think a lot of people realize that, you went every Wednesday and did that work, and you've went out to a lot of different places, and it's brought you to a point that I know you've worked with a ton of famous comedians. So, that's my other question is, do you have any fun stories to share about any of them? Do you have any of those that stand out since you've been doing this for a while now?
Oh, one of the most interesting, the very first, what I would say, closest thing to a household name comedian I ever got to work with was Jimmie J.J. Walker from Good Times. And it was actually a fundraiser. I was part of the organizer one of the organizers for booking the fundraiser. And we went through a lot with Jimmie to get him booked because he wanted a very particular feature. He had a list of people that he would accept. We found somebody outside of the list. He got annoyed that we found this person outside the list and insisted we went back into the list. And he ended up, telling us we could use a gentleman named Patrick O'Donnell out of Delaware. But Patrick wasn't available for my show. And so finally he agreed to let me use Micah Ronan, who in my mind, one of the funniest comics that you can find. And he's clean. Well, Jimmie, when we get to the show, Jimmie did not know Mike, and Mike got on stage, and Mike was just destroying. And Jimmie comes up to me and says, he goes, why? Oh, I can't wait to work all weekend with this guy. This is going to be great. This is such a great comedian. I cannot wait to work all weekend with him. And I looked at him and I said, you're not working with him all weekend. You're only working with him tonight. And he said, well, why am I only working with him tonight? I don't understand. I said, because you're an asshole. And instead of him getting mad at me or anything, he just looked at me and says, why did you just call me an asshole? I said, you insisted on a specific comic, and a particular comic. I wanted you to have to work with Mike all weekend, but because you're an asshole and had to be particular and didn't trust anybody, you get to work with Mike only tonight. And we became friends after that. Like I think he gained a weird level of respect for what I do because he came to realize, okay, maybe. So the next time I booked him, it was actually the Bright Box, and I sent the offer in, and I said, and on the bottom of the offer, I said, tell Jimmie I'll book whoever the hell I want as the feature. And they came back with Jimmie accepts your terms. So we became friends.
That's amazing. And I think that's important to say that a lot of these performers are fundamentally human, and especially for comedians to be able to have that like introspective and that look and to give critiques to each other in a fun way, because we've had so many musicians in a similar light that would have a green room writer that would make you really worried about them. And then once they get there, it's a whole different atmosphere. They're like, oh, no, my management sends that, or, oh, I wrote that 2 years ago, or really not a big deal. But, you don't break down that barrier until you actually work with them. And it sounds like you built that rapport with them in part by being honest with them.
Well, and with Jimmie, I always was. But it works on both ends of it. I mean, the other end of it would be Gallagher, who you experienced Gallagher. He's a pain in the ass. And, he's very moody and very temperamental and things like that. And I did a show with him where I wasn't even on the show. This was me producing the show. I was just there to run the sound for him. And this, I don't know what happened during the show, but out of nowhere, he just blew a gasket and then walked off the stage and left the room. And this was actually shortly after the Bright Box weekend. It was like about a month or two later. And he literally just stormed off and said, that's it, I'm leaving. We had 300 people in the room just staring at the stage like, what next? And his partner, who you met, he gets up on the stage, and instead of trying to fix the situation, kind of talked with the crowd. I finally just kind of said to him, why don't you go out and find him and get him back in here? And of course, the audience is all up in arms. So I just started doing comedy, telling jokes, and the entire audience stayed to watch me tell the jokes. I did almost 25 minutes until in the end, Gallagher didn't come back. So I actually ended up closing a show for Gallagher and I was like in a pair of sweats, like I wasn't even ready for it. But yeah, and ever since that day, I've not. The opposite problem is I've never spoken to him since because of the way he behaved.
Well, at least you didn't have to smash watermelon or anything, right? Good thing you have your own comedy routine.
But it was all sitting there. All the pies were set up like around me. So I'm here telling jokes with all this garbage, and it's pretty funny.
Oh man. Well, I mean, I think it goes to say that, like you said, you work with who you like, you have comedians you like. And that was one of the questions Bill and I had to ask, when we talked about what the series was, what we wanted to find out from performers. You and I have talked about it, off screen before, but, everyone loves a comedian. But the important question is, who is the comedian's comedian? Who is one of your favorite acts? Who are the people that you see that you really admire? Because I think that speaks a lot to me is what favorite musician of mine has a favorite musician, what comedian of mine that I look up to, who do they look up to? Who is their favorite?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, if you want to go the route of the famous comedians, I mean, I was obviously a huge fan of David Brenner. If you want to go with today's living comedians, I love Bill Engvall. I think Bill Engvall is just very funny in his behaviors. Of the comedians you see, coming in with us and touring, like even coming to Bright Box, I've always loved Kelly Terranova, Chris Monty. I mean, those guys are great from a stand up standpoint. I love Jay Black, who I've only got, I don't get to see much. Um, you know, there's so many of them. I mean, and it's not even that I book comics that I just like them myself as a comedian. I book comics that the audience likes too. There's some, but I try very hard. I am a believer that you book people that you feel comfortable booking, not necessarily because they're the funniest, but because they're good in the room and they're easy to get to work with. Because you don't need, just like if I'm not there, I don't need you to have problems. But yeah, I mean, I love those guys. I mean, those are some of my favorites. I mean, I like a lot of the comedians, but there's just something with them, especially just they have some great jokes. Like they're just creative minds.
Yeah, when people ask me who my favorite comedian is at Bright Box, I often have to back it up with saying, well, lately, because every time Irwin brings someone, I love that person. And I remember like when Kelly Terranova came and you're like, yeah, you're going to love his NASCAR jokes. You're going to love how funny he is and how well he fits by not fitting in. And then I think it was a couple months later, we had Joe Bronzi. And I remember coming to you saying, oh, I think Bronzi's the guy. I think that's one I love. And then you just consistently bring in these people. And I always felt so blessed to be able to work there because I would hang out in the booth when the show was slow or between 2 shows or 3 shows, I'd catch everyone's set. And I've just found so many comedians I would have never known. And I don't know. It's maybe an unfair question to ask you who your favorite is because I can't answer it either. Like there's just so many crew.
I miss Kevin Meaney. I mean, that was one of the best weekends I think we ever had. Tony Woods, just incredible. I mean, you could do, and that's the thing. I love comedy. So every comic has a different flair for me and a different way they touch me. I mean, Kevin Lee with his, juggling and the fire and all the stuff he does there, that's a lot of fun. I even like Gary Conrad, even though he's not a comedian, as a hypnotist because it's fun. I love Shaquita when she hosts the drag shows. It's all humor to me.
Right. No, it's a broad term, and I think you just touched on it a bit too. It's not always just stand up. There's so many different facets to entertainment. And again, people might not know, but in addition to being a comedian, you do run your own booking agency and you do host a podcast. Like, take a minute and tell us a little bit about that. How do you stay busy and how do you even have enough time?
Staying busy. Well, the booking part for me is not that difficult. What makes it not difficult is the venues I work with understand the budgeting process and how much it's going to cost. So when I make an offer to a comedian, they don't generally turn it down. They go, well, I might be able to make more money doing this. I generally work with venues that understand that if we want to get the best talent at the best time, just like the Bright Box, we probably pay a little more than some of the venues do for the comics we get, but we're going to get them. We don't have to, it doesn't take a lot of work to do that. Same thing when I work with the Bucks County Playhouse or some of those places. They understand that. Getting into booking was really a survival thing, really more than anything else. I lost my job in 2010. I was still finding my way as a comedian, but I understood how to book. So I just started getting venues so I could make money off of booking comedy while I was unemployed. And, over time, most of those venues have gone away. I really only have now, 5 or 6 venues that I use on a consistent basis, but I still do fundraisers for organizations and things like that. And then as far as the podcast, that's actually more of a joy. I get to work with Ken Water and Mark Matusoff, who are 2 of my favorite people in the world. We just sit around and we interview people and we talk and we smoke cigars and it's fun. It's called Stories and Stogies if you haven't seen it or heard it. And we've already gotten to interview Kevin Farley. We recently interviewed Charles Davis, the CBS NFL analyst. In a couple of weeks. This won't be out probably. The interview won't be out until February or so, but we're about to interview Danny Daniels, who's a famous porn star. So we're going on all aspects of different types of entertainment, and we're interviewing these people to find out more about the person behind the personality. So we did an entire interview with Charles Davis, and we didn't talk about football, you know. So the podcast is I don't even feel like that's a time suck. It's fun, and the booking is so. And I have a day job, but I have a day job that's kind of on my own schedule, so it works well. So I've been lucky that way. So I still have time for my family, still have time for my friends, still time to go out and run, do shows. I hope that answered your question.
No, it does. And that makes sense what you say about the podcast and the joy of it. Bill and I had talked before about wanting to have these conversations with artists, with performers, and we just never found quite the time slot or the way to do it. And when COVID came, we're like, all right, this is our silver lining. Like, let's do the thing we want to do. And, I've said it in all the interviews, we're definitely going to continue this indefinitely. Once touring gets back up and running, I still want to do this series because it's a lot of fun. And it's a lot of the conversations that I maybe get to have with artists that I can't easily share with people. They don't really get to hear the artist's perspective. A lot of the patrons come in, see them play and leave, and they don't realize some of these stories or the beginnings or the inspirations. And it's a big part of my job that makes me love it. When people ask, how can you be here all weekend, all the time? I'm like, I meet so many amazing people and chat with them. And for me, like your podcast, it's a way to share that with the world. So,
the great thing,
it's been our silver
lining. The great thing about continuing it when we go live and back in is you literally could do the artists that are coming in for the weekend. You could do it before the show or in the middle of the weekend or whatever it might be, and you're going to get everybody coming in, and that's good for us because people will see them. I mean, obviously it won't go up the same day, so it'll be a little behind unless you do them, a couple weeks out. But yeah, I think it's a great idea. I think the venues should do more of that.
Yeah, it draws a connection, and I think that's what we need right now because the world is so much a different place right now, and that was a question that we've been asking a lot of the artists because it's unavoidable, and everyone's been handling it differently. Is how has COVID changed the comedy landscape for you? What does that look like now, and what does that look like in the future with COVID?
Well, right now it's a mess. I mean, for lack of a better term, it's not even. There's the Zoom shows, there's the online shows. They're there. I mean, we are doing them through the organization, through Kaleidoscope Comedy. We are still doing Zoom shows, but we're doing them for organizations. Like, I'm not out there saying, okay, let me put on a Zoom show. When an organization, like right now, we have one in February. I don't know when this is coming out. We got one coming up in February for Poplar Springs Animal Sanctuary, Farm Animal Sanctuary. These are organizations that can't do their normal fundraisers. It's not like they can have an open house and have thousands of people come and see the animals and donate money. They have to literally find ways to raise money to keep themselves open. Same thing with some of the churches and synagogues that they don't do their normal fundraisers. Or we did one for and we're doing some for people who are stuck. The funniest one we did one for an assisted living facility, and that was very weird because I don't know if you've seen a Zoom entertainment, but what happens is you put the entertainer is focused, and then across your screen you see all the cameras that are on and all the people. And you're sitting here doing this assisted living facility, and there's somebody there in a hospital bed, and they're making all these motions, and all I feel like saying is, can someone stop and check him? He looks like he's going to pass out. You're wondering, like you're watching them cough. And then of course there's people who can't use Zoom. We did one show where I kept hearing this woman going, "Hey Harvey, I don't know if I'm on or not. Hey Harvey, I think I'm on." And meanwhile, it's the middle of the comic, and all you hear is this loud voice coming through. So that's a big change. And even the clubs that are doing live shows still. I mean, you already know this. I mean, the Bucks County Playhouse, for example, holds 480 people. We can seat 60. The Bright Box holds 130. Let's say you can't even do it because you'd have to do them in groups of 4. You have to sell tickets in a way so that you can separate people well enough. It's there's a lot of clubs that aren't going to recover from this. And what do I think the future holds? I think we're going to see some new clubs because where there were clubs that closed, someone's going to open a club. It's the nature of this. It's the nature of any cycle of a business. You think about retail. If you go back 20 years, 30 years, your retailers were Sears, Montgomery Wards, Kmart, Hills. Now what do you got? Target, Walmart, Kohl's. I think where you've seen clubs close, new clubs will open, but I think we're going to have a very big gap before it comes back fully.
When that's been the difficulty is, it's the new normal, as a lot of people call it, or what we're doing at the moment. And like I said, silver linings, we've been staying busy to do these, and we've been selling the marquee and merchandise, and we've had a lot of positive support. And we're just anxious to get back to a point where it's safe to do things, because that's always been the business model. Weddings pay bills, but they're not fun like having comedy is.
Right.
The starving artist trope is true for both venue and performer sometimes, that you and I both break even that night, but we have a lot of fun. And that was always an expense we could take when the world was doing okay, or it balanced out. So that's the hope for us too, is, we're adapting to what's going on. We want to continue to offer things digitally for people throughout the future, but there's no replacement for the live atmosphere. There's no replacement for the experience. And, I told someone once before, I was like, I kind of miss having to cut someone off. I kind of miss having to threaten to kick someone out. Like, you have this weird Stockholm syndrome where you're like, you know what? I kind of miss being there 60 hours a week. Where did that go? So that's us. It's the hurry up and wait so we can get back to it.
I think people who get into entertainment and into entertainment, whether it be the venue or whether it be the performer, if your thought process is, I'm going to do this to be rich, or I'm going to do this to be famous, you might want to stop doing it right then and there, because becoming rich and famous is very often in the entertainment business either a where you are at the right time, an accident. Hard work can get you just so far. There's going to have to be a break. And I don't, I don't fool myself into thinking someday that I'll be famous, but I love entertaining. And I think that, venue, I was so happy to see in the new stimulus thing, they passed Save Our Stages. I think that, the arts have taken it on the chin long enough. Schools are cutting it out of their programs, and, what are we thinking? Art, I think people who go into the arts are more creative. They're some very often better suited. They get a sense of belonging to something, whether it be doing music, whether it be doing comedy, or whether it be doing one of the other performing arts. It's something that gives you a sense of accomplishment.
Yeah, when they always say every dark ages then was followed by a renaissance, and that's always highlighted by art and music and comedy and expressions of self. So, that's another one of the series that we miss, is once every other month or so we held Phil's Rock Room, and Phil Zuckerman is a local guy who teaches children how to play music, and then they come to Bright Box and they get to perform covers of their favorite songs together for their first time on stage. And that was always big to me, because that was what I didn't have in middle school or high school, or even in young adulthood. So all these avenues that are presented are just something that I love to see utilized, and I really miss, and I can't wait to get back to. So like you said, I've heard of people that got rich and famous and it was a curse. You know what I mean? It actually wasn't even the blessing something it was. So finding that middle ground of doing what you love and having it support you to some degree or wholly, and then still feeling like you have your soul at the end, I think is the real goal.
Yeah, and I think, the interesting thing is, because you and I do have a bit of a generation gap between our ages, I grew up in a world where you had to go to music class, you had to go to art class. Like they were required. You had shop classes, and you just see more and more of those different classes leaving unless you go into the trade schools, and I think it's a crime that we don't see that as important.
Yeah. Well, the one benefit that we have, and you've seen with comedy at Bright Box, is we have a good community that supports it and comes out and sells out these shows. And, for that, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for people like you who, like you said, come out to all these venues and put all the work forward and build the community and build the connections. And some nights for you and I to be like, oh, look, we made $2. So it's always been important to find partners like you. And I'll say it, like I said at the beginning, you're definitely one that we sincerely miss. I tell everybody we miss them, but I mean it with you. We miss you. So
it will. I'm ready when you are. Put it that way. We got to get something going again.
Perfect. Again, thanks for taking the time to talk with us. I don't care what your first wife says. I think you're funny. And I hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much, Josh. It was good talking to you.
All right. See you, buddy.